Hello, my name is Joe Cartwright and welcome to my studio. Today we're going to be painting this beautiful overcast misty scene, and in it I'm going to show you how to use a wet on wet technique to paint this hill of receding conifers. I'm also going to cover why tone is so important in a subject like this and why it's critical that you're always aware of how wet is the surface of your paper and what the paint consistency is in your brush to create these types of effects. So let's get started. Most of these trees are going to be painted wet on wet, so there's no need for me to draw them in at this stage. The same with the water. So for this painting, it's just going to be a very minimalist drawing like this, primarily just indicating where the light patches will be in the painting. And as usual, I'll start by thoroughly wetting the back of my paper. Alright, let that sit there, and while it's absorbing that water, I'm going to mix some paint. I'm going to mix a series of greys because it was a very overcast day when I took this photograph. For the sky, I'll start with some Cobalt Blue. I'll add some Raw Sienna. And then a small amount of permanent rose. I need a lot more of that. Great. Okay, the sky, other than the preserved highlights, the sky will be the lightest part of this painting, so I don't need to go any stronger than that. And then we've got the distant trees. And they'll be the same colour, only much stronger in tone, so I'll mix a stronger mixture. You can use burnt sienna instead of raw sienna if you like. Okay, that's way too much permanent rose. It doesn't matter because this is going to be a much stronger tone. And there's a warm patch in the sky. I'm going to pick up a small amount of cad orange. It's a lot more than I need, and it's also a lot stronger than I need. So let's get rid of most of that. Okay, that'll get us started. Let's wet the paper again. So the paper is very dry now. It sits nice and flat on the board, and it'll be quite some time before it cockles. And if it does that, then I'll just re-wet the back. I'm going to start by putting a little bit of this very weak cad orange up here. There's just a hint of warmth in the sky. Now I'll go into this sky colour. You have to be careful with the permanent rose, because as soon as the top layer gets wet, you're liable to pick up way too much paint, which you then have to adjust again like I'm doing here. I'm happy with that colour, it just needs to be lightened a little bit. Because this brush has a lovely point on it, I can use it for some of these more detailed shapes, especially as they don't have to be too accurate with them. Now I'm going to go and paint this distant tree line, and the surface of the paper has still got enough of a shine on it that I'll be able to paint the trees wet on wet. And by managing the amount of paint on my brush, I limit how much the trees will bleed out. Going to just thicken this marginally. I'm going to add a small amount of burnt sienna now, just to grey it off to a slightly different grey. Darken a few areas. I'm going to add more paint. I'm going to add some French ultramarine now and some burnt sienna. And this will add another layer of trees closer to the foreground. I'm only very generally following the photo. Now I've lost some of this mist back here. I'm going to lift that. Just using a very thirsty brush. Sometimes a tissue works better. These trees in this region are sharper edged, so for that I'm going to get my fan brush and we'll start making them look a bit more like conifers. I'm going to add a little bit of raw sienna to that just to warm it up. I really enjoy painting wet on wet. And now we'll come forward again, and once more we're going to thicken this paint. Just using both French ultramarine and cobalt blue just to make small adjustments. And again some raw sienna. Just quick flicks up from the bottom. Vary the tone. Alright, now we're going to do the foremost trees. I need to let that dry just a little bit. It's a bit too wet. If I keep painting into it, I'm not going to get the slightly sharper edges that I'm after. While that's drying, I'll add some more paint. You can see how the paint's not flowing very much in my palette. I'm going to dry this area here so I can get some sharper edges in amongst these foreground trees. If you look at this, you can see the odd hint of shiny areas. So I didn't want to bone dry because I want some of this paint to create soft edges and other areas to create hard edges. So get my fan brush again. Get my rigger, paint in a whole series of tree trunks, doesn't matter where they go. I'm going to paint over them. So with the fan brush, I just flick the brush to either side of the trunk. This is a hog hair fan brush. I like the stiff bristles. But whichever brush you have, it just takes a little bit of practice to create the effect I'm producing. You can also use a regular round brush, splay the hairs out like that. Just takes a bit more practice to create that effect. But the fan brush is much easier to use. Painting this very quickly, stay ahead of the drying of the paper. When this dries a little bit more, I'll go in and just sharpen those edges. I want a few more marks like this. I'm just going to paint the sides of these buildings and paint the boats very quickly, all the while keeping an eye out on how this is drying. Right now this is still reasonably wet. Just a cool grey, I think, for the sides of these buildings. So for that I'm just using some Cobalt Blue and a tiny amount of burnt sienna. With watercolor, a lot of painting, especially when painting wet on wet like this, is all about timing and observation. You just can't walk away from a painting like this and come back expecting it to be the right wetness level. Now, the water. In this case, I'm going to be using the same palette of colours that I've used up here because they're the main cause of the colours that we have down here. Let's quickly mix some more paint. The reflections in this case are going to be a little bit lighter than the trees that we have here. Just a tiny bit of permanent rose. Now, along the edge of the shore, we have a dark area because that shoreline is protected from the wind and also would be partially in shadow. keeping that bottom edge live, so I don't want it to set on the paper because I'm going to soften it very quickly. But I want to run this edge all the way across. There we go. Now, clean my brush, tap it on the edge a few times just to take some of the water out. We just lightly touch that edge, and that gives us that hint of mist in the distance. Now the sky, which is a lighter tone, it's going to be reflected a little bit darker than the sky. So with reflections, the general rule is reflections of dark objects will be lighter and reflections of light objects will be darker. So the sky being a lighter object in this case, its reflection will be a little bit darker. So I'm picking up some of the sky colour, adding a bit of this darker colour to it, not being too scientific about it. Now right at the water's edge, that area is darker still, so I picked up some of this dark colour, put it into a dry part of my palette, and then just add more paint to it. Mainly just French ultramarine and burnt sienna with a little bit of raw sienna. I'll get my fan brush and just come in and use that darker colour to just add a few more shapes near the water's edge. while I'm using a stiff brush, I'm barely touching the paper. If I press too hard, I'll just disturb the paint underneath and muddy it up. Just hinting at the reflections of these trees. Timing is critical when you're painting something like this. Here you can look at the water, and it's just got a hint of shine on it, which tells me if I go in with a brush that's not too wet, I'll get these marks here. If my brush is too wet, however, it'll push the paint away and I risk creating lots of cauliflowers in an area where I don't want them. Alright, now we've got these lovely ripples on the painting surface. You can see how by mixing lots of paint, it allows me to concentrate more on what I'm painting rather than having to rush and mix more paint. I want this to flow a little bit more than it's flowing, so just protect the rest of my paper, and now I'm directing the water onto the paper. clean my brush, squeeze all the water out. So I just get a towel and just squeeze all the water out, gently of course. And I'm going to lift a few little ripples in the water. Just hinting at a reflection of these lighter objects. These bones aren't that significant, I'm just adding a little bit of colour to them. And I'm just going to very lightly tint this roof so it's not quite white. Let me go and dry this, and there'll be a few little marks I can add and sign it, but I need it to be dry before I do the next stage. I like to add a bird like that just to add a bit of animal life to the scene. Just scraping in a hint of a mask there. Let's put another one here. I could have used gouache or something like that, but that's a lot easier. And that's it. So what are the lessons from this? When you're painting wet on wet, if you want to create this feeling of depth in your painting, start with your lightest tones first and then gradually increase the strength of your paint. Only dry your paper when you need your edges to be sharp edged, otherwise all your edges will be soft. If an area of your painting dries too fast, you can either spray it before it loses its shine or wait till it's totally dry, then wet that area with clean water, let the water soak in for a bit, and then continue with your wet on wet soft edges. I didn't need to do that in this case, but that's a very valid technique. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give it a like, and if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please do so. And if you're able, please consider supporting me on Patreon.